Welcome to the Rig Doctor podcast, where I'm giving out remedies to soothe your ailing tone and fix your sick pedal boards. And today, I'm back with my good buddy Tony Lowe, and we're talking about music from 1990 to 1995, and looking at some of the guitar trends, some of the tone trends, and just our overall favorite picks. Now, I know there's a lot of different angles to come at this from, and we decided to use an amalgamation of the Billboard's charts in addition to what MTV was playing, so what was charting and kind of their equivalency on their video requests. So we're kind of using that to kind of create a little bit of a baseline as far as what people were listening to, what was popular, and then kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of some of these different artists, some of these different guitarists, talking about what they used, why that was iconic, and then maybe if it was sort of the start of a cascading trend that ended up taking off. So this is kind of a cool deep dive. It's a longer podcast, but I think if you're a fan of 90s music, you'll definitely find some stuff to connect to. And I, of course, would love to hear your suggestions. If there's things that you think of, artists that you think of, guitar tunes that you think of, that you think really helped catapult the early 1990s and kind of propel that in the inertia sonically into the later part of the 90s. So really cool episode. I think you're going to dig it. And also, if you want to support the podcast, you can do so by sharing this on social media, subscribing to our podcast, or following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. You can also support us financially by purchasing one of the Vertex products, my company, from either us on our website or from an authorized dealer. Or you can become a supporting member through Patreon, and we have 3 different levels as low as $4.99 a month for entry. We also offer a version of the account for free if you can't afford any of the options there on Patreon. You can just send us an email, info@vertexeffects.com. And even at the $4.99 a month, you get exclusive deals and discounts on Vertex products, as well as early access to new products. And you get to be a part of our weekly Q&A and live stream that's private for just membership only. And if you want to get any consulting on your rig, we also offer that through therigdr.com. And that's just as it sounds, www.therigdr.com, and you can sign up for one-on-one consults with me through Zoom. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And again, if you can't afford any of the membership options, we offer our standard tier, which is the $4.99 tier, privileges at no charge, no means testing required. So just send us an email. We'd be happy to have you. I also want to thank our sponsors, Blue Microphones, Vertex Effects, my company, and also Diodario and True Tone for sponsoring the podcast and making it possible. Without further delay, let's get into the iconic music, the iconic guitar parts, the sounds, the tones from 1990 to 1995. So Tony, welcome back.
Hey, it's good to be back, man.
So, as you know, as I'm accused of often, I really love the studio guitar tones of the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
But I thought that a place where we might intersect, where I had enough cognition and you had certainly more awareness as how much older are you than me?
Well, I'm 42, born in 78, and I was definitely playing in a band that played in front of people by 1994. So I was listening before that and there for a lot of that.
So I think, and I was born in 85, so I think that the place where we might intersect with a point where we knew, where we were both aware of popular music was sometime in the early 90s. So today we're going to talk about the first half of the 90s, iconic guitar tones, great guitar tones to be admired and revered. And I've been using as my kind of, I don't know what you call it, my sort of lookup table, is I've been using the Billboard Hot 100 to kind of help me refresh my memory on what might have been playing on the radio at that time. but certainly that's not the only place where one might find quality guitar tones. So, I want to preface that Hot 100 is not always reflective of the spectrum of what's out there.
Yeah.
But I think that we can kind of dance around maybe that era, and I'm going sequentially only because that's what that's what I have in front of me. But we can jump around for sure. But I'm curious, is it easier for you to go year by year, or is it better for us to just jump around eras?
Well, let's see where we go. I'm kind of curious to see where you start. I actually had a couple of kind of like trends or a couple artists that overlap as I was thinking about this. So I guess let's just kind of see where this leads, man.
All right. Well, I'm kind of looking. I mean, obviously, guitar was more centric in the 90s, so most songs on the Hot 100 would likely have some guitar on it. But we want to think standouts here.
Yeah.
And just so we're kind of referencing the same list, want to just share this with you.
Now, I will confess that when I was thinking about this, I wasn't thinking in terms of what were hit songs on the radio necessarily, because
right. And I think that's hence my preface to this, which is this isn't the only place where we can draw from, but this is going to kind of maybe give us a touchstone where we're like, oh yeah, Rhythm Nation, Janet Jackson, that was about 1990.
Yeah.
And also, it should be named that some things would make a Hot 100 in 1990 that maybe had released before that. And so it doesn't necessarily always encompass exactly that year, although I think with a pretty decent approximation.
All right. Well, why don't you pick one, and then I'll tell you what I had, because our approaches are different but complementary.
Right. Well, number one, she just mentioned in 1990 was Wilson Phillips. Hold on. So yes. There's always that. Well, the first one that I see that I know there was some good guitar tones on, 1990, Michael Bolton, How Am I Supposed to Live Without You? I'm pretty sure that was Michael Landau or Dan Huff. I think it's Michael Landau that played the solo on How Am I Supposed to Live Without You? Do you remember this song?
Not specifically. Remember that I was trying not to listen to elevator music in the early 90s. So,
well, I mean, this was beyond the elevator. This was on every pop radio station of the day, every dentist office.
Yeah, but I'm just saying I wasn't listening to pop radio. I'm a counterculture kid, but
it was unavoidable. I remember sitting in the office of my elementary school, and this would be like on the radio that like the office manager of the elementary school would be playing. Like you would hear like this sort of stuff.
Okay. I don't know what to say, but yeah. So we can talk about, we can certainly talk about, Michael Landau and what he was doing back then, because he's a very important session guitarist. So
let's go to YouTube here for a second, because I'm sensing some resistance.
No, I just
of getting in here.
No,
maybe I'm projecting.
I'm not resisting. I'm just when you said we were going to talk about iconic early 90s tones, if I think what is the guitar sound of the 90s, the last thing I think of is Michael Bolton. So I'm just surprised, but that's why it's so good that we're doing this, because there are so many ways to make a guitar sound that is relevant to a population.
So let's just refresh our memories here. I'm just going to pull something off of YouTube that's not going to be in contention of copyright. But let's see what we got. You ready?
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right, here we go. Cool. So you just heard a little Michael Bolton. You heard the solo that Michael Landau and or Dan Huff, I think it was Michael Landau, played that one. That was, I think, one example of good guitar tone for that generation there's certainly a lot of processing on it. It wasn't what you wanted to do. But I think that as far as a guitar tone for that generation, that was certainly, that was a guitar solo that producers were asking for, and it had merit whether we like it or not. Let me go back to this list though. That was one that I would say stood out to me. Are you seeing anything here? Let's look in kind of the top 20 of 1990.
Well, I think of this first year of the 90s as not really establishing a, its place as 90s sounds yet. However,
yeah,
there are some important things here, because we are seeing some of the what I see here is the holdovers from the previous era, and maybe a little bit of a change in taste, because we've got Billy Idol with Cradle of Love.
Right.
We've got what else? Oh, John Bon Jovi.
Yep. You got some Heart in there too. I mean, which 70s carry over, but they really changed a lot by the time they hit the 90s.
And when we start to see things, we see things in here like Rod Stewart doing Downtown Train. He's covering a Tom Waits song. We have Billy Joel with We Didn't Start the Fire. We have Poison, Unskinny Bop. And what I see in there is all of the hard rocker people we mentioned there. Not Billy Joel, but certainly Poison, and Nelson is there with Can't Live Without Your Love and Affection. But these are those artists. They might have been hits, but this is kind of a waning period of that sound. You can see the rise already of more of the R&B thing with Belle Biv DeVoe. Even Roxette is there. Technotronic had Pump Up the Jam. Paula Abdul is in there with that.
Janet Jackson.
And my point is that we're getting away from the hair metal thing. Those bands are on the decline.
But we could also argue that a lot of those hair metal bands went way more ballad pop as they got into the 90s, because that was kind of like a pivot that was in sort of their standard deviation range that they could do.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is the greater trend is shifting here in the rock and roll world. They are competing with all of these pop stars in a way that guitar wasn't hurt by that in the late 80s. I mean, not in the Van Halen era, through the 80s. I mean, I guess, 80s were poppy, but when we're talking about guitarists with relevant guitar tones to the greater cultural conversation, music history conversation, if you ask, a musicologist about the early 90s and the late 80s, in the late 80s, guitar is a big part of the conversation. This era, between 1990 and 1992, everything is going to change about the guitar on the radio.
But you have some holdouts here. Like I see Tom Petty, Free Fallin' on here.
Right, but remember that those aren't songs that were pushing guitar heroism, and that's the big shift. This is.
But I also think that but if we're talking about great guitar tones, I think unquestionably Mike Campbell is in that conversation. And also in parallel with this, he was also working with Don Henley. He was all over I can't remember the name of the Don Henley record in the 90s that had like Bruce Hornsby and he had a lot of.
My point is that we're talking about guitar tones, and yes, he was playing. I know there's guitar on a lot of this music, but what I'm saying is the tones aren't definitive tones of like it. When you think Mike Campbell really rocks on guitar, Nobody says, Free Fallin', man, he is tearing it up on that sucker. Or, yeah, the guitar tones on Free Fallin' are blowing my mind. No, it's just a great song. You see the difference? Like, whereas...
I see the difference, but I think that in some ways they're coalesced because there's something about the arrangements of the guitars in pop music that we like. In certainly the instrumental hooks in Free Falling is all about the acoustic guitar sound in the intro. And that's a part of that sound. Substitute that for a saxophone in Free Falling's not Free Falling. So I hear what you're saying in that this wasn't like a shred sort of like, or like really amazing solo tone. But I think what he's bringing to the table insulates that music where it wouldn't be the same song had the guitars not had this sort of arrangement. And I still think that Tom Petty's music generally is pretty guitar centric. Yeah. A lot of the secondary hooks that are not vocal hooks are all guitar hooks.
I think I'm misunderstanding what it is you want to talk about, because you're talking, I mean, if the question is guitar relevant in all forms of music in any given year? Of course it is. So let me ask you then, help me out here. What are the definitive guitar tones, and how can we talk about them?
Well, I think there's a lot existing in parallel, and so I think it's let's kind of look at, you know, some of the ones that we think were standouts, where the guitar was prominent, sounded great, was a great tone. This could be a rhythm tone, this could be a lead tone. And then I think as we, you know, right now we're focusing on 1990. By the time we get to 1995, maybe we'll have established some trends around things that we see, placement of guitar, prominence
I see what
of guitar.
You're doing.
You know, certainly as we get further away from 1990, probably guitar is starting to get less and less relevant. Certainly by the time it hits 2000.
Okay, I see what you're wanting to do. I think music. I might have misunderstood. So yeah, I agree. The trends here are toward ballads. I think there are soaring tones. I think that the production is about, you know, there's still that 80s sheen and clarity and separation between the sounds. And then if you look way down this list of number ones, we start to see some things that are changing. Enjoy the Silence by Depeche Mode. Now that song has an 80s sound, but the record it was on saw them embracing a lot of rock and roll guitar sounds, and the producer Flood was involved in starting to incorporate those. That would then happen in Achtung Baby for U2, when they started looking for some rawer tones, and Flood was brought in to mix some of that stuff. You've got Tesla and Skid Row, more ballady type numbers though. Look at number 75 entering this top, you know, the top 100. We've got Faith No More. You know, so they're a little bit more challenging, you know, a little different. And we're also seeing a marriage of a guy trying to rap with kind of a rock metal sound. And of course that's a Red Hot Chili Peppers 80s knockoff, that song Epic. I'm not saying that they rip off the Red Hot Chili. I think Faith No More is their own thing. I think they're a great band. But certainly that song in the MTV space was deliberately Chili Pepper vibes. But it's entering the mainstream.
Now, what are we going to say about B-52's Love Shack? Certainly there's some guitar
There
work
is, and they were on the charts with Rome as well. And the B-52s kind of straddled this, during the 80s, more of a 50s retro thing. They were going for those twang tones. Yeah. And they were very much, you know, they and REM were both in Athens, Georgia, and they had more of like that kitschy factor going on. As they entered into the 90s, they were almost becoming more of a pop band. So they were kind of embracing more that with that record. What is it called? Good Stuff, or I forget. Is it Cosmic Thing? I forget which record.
I don't know. I was kind of teasing a little bit, but I do remember playing in a wedding band and, having to play, or that was like something that was like on the list of requestable
that's just
songs.
it, is you kind of came to them after because they were more dangerous. They were kind of dangerous in the 80s. Kind of irreverent, and, Rock Lobster and Planet Claire and all that. That was punk stuff.
Right. It's interesting here, too. We see Motley Crue in the bottom. Aerosmith certainly had relevance in the 80s and in the 90s and through the 2000s, too, when they were doing the Armageddon Diane Warren song. I forget the name of it. It was played at my prom.
And then, so some things that are not on the charts that are extraordinarily relevant, okay, is that at this time, we had this is the coming of the grunge era, right? Or the Seattle era,
but they weren't yet charting.
No, of course not. But they were touring.
But they did start charting, I think, by the time we get to 92.
But very significantly, we have to set the stage for that. Because around this time, two major tours were getting going, which is Sonic Youth and Nirvana both signed to Geffen Records at this time. Okay, so Geffen Records was starting to look for those. That's a huge label then. And they started to sign up these bands, and they weren't pressing a lot of records, but they were getting them ready. Sonic Youth took a whole bunch of, they took who? Dinosaur Jr. and L7, I think, Babes in Toyland, a bunch of those kinds of bands on tour of Europe. And Europe, they were there for a while, and while they were there is when things really took off in the next year with Nirvana. Meanwhile, Mother Love Bone was happening in the Pacific Northwest. That's the band that would later, after the death of the singer, become related to Soundgarden and Temple of the Dog at that time, and Pearl Jam. And in Los Angeles, remember that 1987 had been Appetite for Destruction. And so that rough, tough boy thing was on the rise. And it's a different vibe. You had the twin giants of Los Angeles were in 1990 and 90, in the late 80s even, were Jane's Addiction and Guns N' Roses, both big guitar bands, and abandoning kind of like what was the LA vibe before. So what had been a different vibe, now Guns N' Roses took all. They ate everyone's lunch, and Jane's Addiction got the counterculture.
So if you were going to give Tony's pick, thank you for that context. If you're going to give Tony's pick for Billboard Hot 100 for maybe not the best guitar tone, but guitar tone that was sort of influential, whether that was more infrastructure, kind of structural guitar, like kind of more the Mike Campbell thing, or sort of virtuosic, like lead playing, like the Landau solo, let's say, in the Michael Bolton. Who's kind of got Tony's stamp of approval if we're distilling it for 1990, looking in particular at
hit bands
charts.
Like this.
Yeah. Who's got your vote?
It's a tough one. I think you were onto something with Michael Landau. I think this was still very much on the charts. This was a session player's world. So,
yeah,
Landau, very important. You said Dan Huff. I think those guys were, they were doing stuff. I think that's an important thing. I don't know those players and the specific tracks they played on the way that you do. But I think where you would be experiencing a lot of guitar in 1990 just in the pop culture, it was more like the riffs in the crossover hits. So yeah, you'd be hearing Faith No More and bands like EMF. Do you remember it? You're Unbelievable and Jesus Jones.
Yep.
Came a little bit later, but that stuff that's the vibe that's on the rise.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that Michael Bolton soloing is great, and that's really, I think that's pretty quintessential of that era. But I mean, when you're looking through here, there's so much Michael Landau all over this. I'm pretty sure he played on a lot of the Wilson Phillips stuff. Definitely played on a lot of the Michael Bolton
takes
stuff.
The prize, man.
Paul Jackson Jr. is here a lot with Luther Vandross. I also think he did a lot of the Mariah Carey stuff too, because it had a lot of really clean funk guitar. Yeah, it's hard, and I'm pretty sure he was also playing a lot of the James Ingram stuff too. And although not guitar related, I think Babyface, Whip Appeal, that whole thing, like he was certainly, there was some great guitar work on Babyface albums. I don't know that it had quite got there yet. In this version of Whip Appeal is doesn't have a lot of guitar on it, but subsequent songs definitely had some great stuff on them as he became kind of got more into doing like film related stuff. I think ended up doing, him and L.A. Reid did Boomerang, I think, and became like, producers at that point and less artist oriented. But just wanted to throw that in there. But let's go to 91. Good. Right on the top. This has a great guitar tone on it. Bryan Adams, Everything I Do It For You. That's like amazing Strat tone.
All right. It is that tone, and it was everywhere. You can't even imagine, Mason. I mean, that song. It's the Robin Hood theme song, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
But you don't like that tone?
I mean, I think you're laughing as if most people our age think this is cool or something. No, Bryan Adams doesn't. Bryan Adams doesn't blow my skirt up.
I think it's such a great guitar tone, though. I was just looking him up. Keith Scott. There's this diagram that I have of a Pete Cornish rig. It's all like documented, like from start to finish. And there are these Bryan Adams rigs that Pete Cornish made for that tour in the early 90s. And so it shows all the effects and the interfacing that they did, and it's all like 70, like he had like a 70s Strat, the main guitar player Keith Scott, like a 70s Strat and a Marshall, and it's like those out of phase positions. Sounds so good, man. I really love
I will say this:
sound.
Bryan Adams himself is a darn good guitar player.
I've never like really heard him like because a lot of those live performances, because I've watched a lot of them. A lot of times he never has a guitar in his hands, and then like, what was the other big one that they had? The other hit that's from that same generation. What's it called? Please Forgive Me.
I know. I mean, I only heard the Bryan Adams songs that I couldn't escape.
This one would have been pretty ubiquitous too. I mean, not as big as the Robin Hood one, but man, it also had really, really great tones. But there was kind of like a breakdown where they would, the guitar had a lot of space for the solo, and then like Bryan Adams, like his tech would like bring out a Gretsch, and he'd be like strumming on the Gretsch, and he'd have like a stereo Fawn, like mid 60s Vox AC30s behind him. It's pretty great.
I must say, validating the story I've been telling. As we move down the list, Unbelievable by EMF hits number 6.
Yeah, I see it. And More Than Words.
Yes.
That's another, extreme pivots to the real ballady, acoustic, the softening of the more aggressive bands. Amy Grant had a lot of all Dan Huff guitar parts on I don't think Baby Baby had a lot, but
the guitar is showing up on
the
the records, you know, and even if Extreme was only having hits with the ballads, their record had that record. I didn't like, you know, it's another one of those things I tried to avoid, Mason, but I still know about it. You know, it had a lot of guitar on it. You know, if you picked up Guitar Player magazine, Extreme was all through there. You know,
absolutely, yeah, I get that, but commercially, they just want to hear him play.
That's right. They had More Than Words, and they had Wholehearted was the next hit for them. Mm-hmm. But remember that they were still a guitar-centric band, you know, in that way, where it was about guitar heroics. Now, I agree with you. Their hits, no, not now. And scrolling on down, Jesus Jones, like I said,
the REM, losing my religion, man. The mandolin never has been so cool.
That's actually quite true. It starts to, you know, that was a big that song Will Climb, thanks to MTV. You'll see that hit much higher on the charts.
Yeah, that's a great song though. And then Lenny Kravitz, It Ain't Over Till It's Over. As far as rhythm guitar playing, you know, had that very kind of like Philadelphia type sound, like, you know, from the 70s.
Was, you know, he always goes for a particular vibe, and he was chasing the blood, sweat, and tears there. And I would say, as much as I think Lenny Kravitz with Are You Gonna Go My Way will be a significant.
That's such a great song. And the guitar tone is killer.
And that whole record is done on a tiny little Gibson Skylark. That all those frazzy tones.
Oh,
yeah. Well, really? Not the whole record. They had other sounds, but it's funny because inside it, there's all these pictures of all these different rigs, but inside the gatefold. But in reality, they had Craig Ross, who's a great guitar player, and Lenny Kravitz together.
Where it was recorded, in New Jersey,
recorded by Henry Hirsch at Waterfront Studios in Hoboken.
Yeah.
They had Lenny got inspired by some little Gibson Skylark, and a lot of the tones are his favorite gold top Les Paul, just kind of cranked through that little amp, and then lots of, you know, obviously every record has a bunch of oddball stuff, but
he played a lot. He played the drums on it too, didn't he? And the bass.
It depends on the song, but he played a lot of stuff. He had another bass. There's another bass player that played with him. A lot of it is just Lenny and Henry Hirsch in there. Craig Ross played the solo on Are You Gonna Go My Way? And then, you can always tell when Lenny plays. It's embarrassing how much I know about these bands, but when Lenny plays, you can always tell because he's got a very fast and nervous vibrato, and Craig Ross has a much more like a Jimmy Page. I mean, you know, he's more deliberately sloppy than Jimmy Page is, in a good way, I mean, but he's got he doesn't have that weird vibrato that Lenny has. You can really hear a short, fast vibrato.
Yeah.
But anyway, that song comes the next year or two.
Yeah, Extreme again, as you said, Wholehearted. More Michael Bolton and Rod Stewart here.
We're skipping over Luther Vandross, but I think he had some good guitar on his records.
Yeah, he usually had a lot of them. He had like Paul Jackson and a lot of kind of more of the R&B cats that were on him. Definitely like good stuff there, but also some of the more like ballady ones. I think it depended on who the producer was, because some of those had more of like, I don't know by song, but some of them had more like the Michael Landau, Dan Huff stuff on them that were kind of more like crossover-y hits. And then the ones that were like more R&B specific, usually they would use guys like Paul Jackson, Michael Williams, those types of guys that were just like so much more competent at doing like funk parts or like really like cool inversions and stuff like that.
I see.
I see
Divine Alice here.
No.
And that is actually, that goes in line with that trend where we saw EMF and Jesus Jones make the charts, where there's rawer sounding guitar adjacent. So if you listen to that song, it's not so much that there's, guitar solos, but there will be like a bridge where the guitar is the featured instrument, and it's not just like a Prince type guitar sound like you would have had in the 80s. And I'm referring to the hit Prince songs on the radio, that clean, what I think he does best, that beautiful, clean, funky thing. They'll have a breakdown, and it's a gnarly, overdriven thing, like Divinalist had. It's like just these stabs of guitar tone for the solo rather than a melody. So textural.
Do you see you see Bonnie Raitt there? I mean, she's always had great tone. Yeah. And I think that this was still in the Don Was era, where I think that some of the best guitar playing, not only her playing slide, but Michael Landau played on a lot of those records as well. So like all the rhythm guitar is Michael Landau, and then you have Bonnie Raitt coming in for all these slide tones. And I think on some of those, they were Dumble amplifiers and a Boss CE1 or a not a CE1, a CS1 or a CS2 compressor.
I've heard that Bonnie Raitt got a Dumble because of Lowell George, and that she didn't like it.
Yeah, well, I know one of the guitars she used for a while was Lowell's 70s Strat, and I think her main one was one that was given to her by Lowell when they were in Little Feat. The 68 or 60, is it 68 Strat?
She's got a 66 or a 65, but it's a first year big headstock transition logo.
Big headstock, yeah, because it doesn't have the later 60s logo. That's right.
Right,
but no finish on it.
By the way, kids, I get so annoyed by all the Strat players talking about no one uses the middle pickup by itself, and there are tons of great guitar tones with that middle pickup. One of them being Bonnie Raitt all the time. If you're listening to Bonnie Raitt play a solo, the odds of her not being on the middle pickup are slim.
She's so great, man. I love Bonnie Raitt. Yeah. Let's see what else we got here. A lot of Mariah Carey. There's definitely some funk guitar on that. Seal. Not a lot of guitar on it, but man, I like Seal, especially in the 90s.
Talk about Landau delivering.
Oh, yeah, that wasn't until later. I don't think he was on any of the albums, though. I think he was only live. I think he was only on the tour.
Is that right?
Pretty sure. There's some... Seal 2 had, like, Jeff Beck on some of the songs.
Hey, look down here. We have Queensryche with... now, watch this. Now, Queensryche is a Seattle band, okay? So they're up there, and they're witnessing, at this time, the transition of the power to the alt rockers, right? And what happens here, you'll see that Queensryche's record, the hit Silent Lucidity, do you remember that one? So that'll be a hit for them. And watch what happens next year. They'll have more hits because the record label will be pushing Queensryche as part of the Seattle thing, as a trial thing. So I think when you skip ahead to 1992, all of this is from my weird memory, so bear with me. But when you skip ahead to that, you're going to see they're going to roll out, like, from that record, Jet City Woman or some other more rock songs, and we'll see if that makes the chart.
Now, what about Chris Isaak, Wicked Game? I mean, that's like a quintessential Strat into a twin reverb.
Well, that one
sound.
is an outlier. I mean, no, it's great. It is. That's one of my favorite guitar things ever. I keep forgetting that, because my want is always to talk about overall trends instead of like specifics, so I forget. But I was going to say that one got in because of the David Lynch, because of Twin Peaks. Was it Twin Peaks? Blue Velvet? Oh shoot! Well, it was featured in a David Lynch work, and so that one.
But man, it's so good. Yep. That guitar tone. I don't know who played it. I know like the guy that like toured it, Herschel Yatfowitz or something like that.
Oh, really?
Like a Portland guy. But but I don't know actually who played it on the record. I don't think it was Chris Isaac.
No, I don't think so either, but I don't know the answer to that.
I'm looking it up. Who played Wicked Game? We're looking it up.
Well,
let's look. Wicked Game on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I don't see the personnel. James Calvin Wilsey.
Okay.
Yeah, man. Whoever played, that was him. He killed it.
Yeah, you know what's funny is because I always play strats, and I always thought that was a Gretsch. I never thought it was a strat. No, it is a Gretsch. It's a strat. You have it right because I learned later. But when I was younger, I always thought, man, you just can't do that on a strat. Yeah, you really can.
I think there might be some compression on it too to get all the sustain.
Oh, hey, honorable mention during this period, and it could be that it comes later. Never mind. I was going to say Jeff Buckley, but that comes later.
Yeah. Well, that was great. What a twist of fate.
Here you go. Signs by Tesla was a holdover from the late 80s vibes. And a huge... that one got...
Yeah.
Remember, too, you know what I'm realizing, Mason, is that this was before the era of consolidated radio. I'll bet the radio where I am was very different because I was in the rural Midwest during the era we're describing, and you were in like the Los Angeles area. So it was all LA makes sense radio. If you were in a public place, they probably did play a lot of like poppy stuff like that. Where I was when I was a kid, all they wanted to hear, you would hear Tom Petty, sure, but it was a lot of, you would go in a grocery store and you would hear either really tame R&B, or you would hear Creedence, or you would hear, classic rock. You weren't hearing a lot of pop stuff on the radio. I'd have to go to my grandma's house because they had cable and I could see MTV to find out what was going on.
So who's your pick kind of based on the charting bands here for guitar tone, guitar
just
sounds?
Great guitar sounds?
Who gets Tony's trophy?
Well,
I got mine.
I'm not picking Chris Isaac just because to me it needs to be more emblematic of the times, but
well, he was always kind of old
exactly
school,
it's an outlier.
His
it
whole
doesn't
vibe.
Really, golly, to tell the guitar story, give me yours. Tell me yours. Maybe I'll.
Mine's Bryan Adams. It's got to be. I think that was probably my favorite of the charting hits. The Bryan Adams, Everything I Do. That's
okay.
It has that piano lead in.
Oh yes, I very much remember.
And then the guitar.
I remember the video was playing all the time. Everything I do. It hurts me down to my very core, but because of its ubiquitousness, I have to agree that is the sound of 1990 guitar.
Yeah. Let's go to 92. Let's see what happens. I think you're going to become happier here. Oh man, Red Hot Chili Peppers! I see right away. Oh my God,
now,
under the bridge.
Yeah, so now you're seeing what you're seeing here when we look through this list is a divergence of the pop market. You're going to see the rock and roll get rockier. So in other words, you're going to see the rise of some of the rock bands and soon the so-called grunge, so-called.
Yeah, because Nirvana's on there at 32.
That's going to start to rise because remember, they're touring Europe and the record is catching on in the States while they're in Europe. So that's what's happening. Geffen has signed them. Those records are out there and they're growing. Now, so you'll see a lot of guitar bands and less apologetic. You're going to see the guitar come to the forefront and you're going to see a divergence where the market is also pushing more rap, R&B type artists into its own sector. So there's less.
Absolutely. Well, you get End of the Road. Look at that. I think that hangs there for a good long while.
Yeah.
Boys to Men.
So
that was, I think, a Babyface song too.
Yeah. So you'll see more and more songs that are like pop, rap, hip hop. Like proto hip hop, I would say, or the dawn of hip hop on MTV.
Well, I mean, definitely, because look, you got Baby Got Back is number 2, so that'll fall into hip hop. Crisscross Jump,
that
hip hop.
Those hits are MTV culture hits. Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back is awesome, but it made it because the video. Same with Crisscross, it becomes visual. Look at our gimmick. We're kids. We have clothes on backwards. All of that stuff is made for an MTV. MTV is tops now. Radio is less important.
Right. Yeah, and Eric Clapton, man, the unplugged Tears in Heaven,
MTV,
big one for acoustic guitar. But man, for electric guitar, Red Hot Chili Peppers does such a great, super compressed. I remember. Did he play with the capo, or did he just bar the whole thing?
For that intro? I think he barred it.
Yeah,
he bars all the time when he plays. Like if you watch him, he always plays bar chords.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was trying to learn it, when I first started playing guitar, I just used a capo because it was a lot easier.
And I say it's I wonder now it's fun because we can talk about effect. I distinctly hear a Dynacomp on that intro. There's actually 2 guitars playing.
Yeah, I have the multi-track. I think it's got to be a Dynacomp in the Strat. It's
definitely. When I was a kid, I was so into those tones. This is also where I'm gonna make a couple gear observations when we get to some of these bands.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Where are we? I mean, certainly there's going to be guitar tones in Mr. Big because you got
and those are important because Mr. Big was like the champion for the hair metal guys that still wanted to rock and be hairy metal. Mr. Big was the virtuosos, the Musicians Institute guys or whatever.
Yeah. Well, then you got On Black or White. Slash is in a part of that. Tim Pierce is in there, session musician wise. Let's see. Got November Rain. You got the softer, a little bit of the softer side of Guns N' Roses. Some solo work there, a little more melodic solo.
So I have an observation to make. Remember that this is Guns N' Roses' second record, right? Now we're looking at the Billboard hits. If we had been looking at MTV, you would have seen In Excess and you would have seen Guns N' Roses near the top.
Yeah, I remember seeing the video a lot.
But before that, I'm saying before November Rain was out, you would have seen Welcome to the Jungle and Sweet Child of Mine being the top things on MTV before this. So now it's creeping into the radio, right? So MTV first. Now, first, remember I said in 1990 they were the kings in Los Angeles. Then the videos from Appetite for Destruction took off. Then the radio picks it up. That's also sort of true of the Chili Peppers, but not really. It's more a Guns N' Roses phenomenon. And an observation about gear is people were looking for classic Marshall sounds, but this is before the era of reissues. And there's going to be 3 important guitar tones in 1991 from there to 1992 that all utilize and make maximum use of the Marshall Silver Jubilee. And that's Guns N' Roses, although I know Slash used classic amps. That Silver Jubilee was a huge part of the Guns N' Roses experience for anybody that was, drinking them in. The Black Crowes, Shake Your Moneymaker, and the breakthrough Chili Peppers record, Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Now, is it used? But for Chili Peppers,
Yes.
was it used on the record, or was it just?
100%.
It was.
He had a stereo rig with the Silver Jubilee and a Marshall Super Bass on that record. And by the way, a lot of that stuff was because Brendan O'Brien produced that record and the Black Crowes, and that amp was the move for all those bands that were going for a beefy but classic Marshall tone. And the multi-amp thing is very much a Brendan O'Brien thing.
Well, and I think he was splitting out of a CE1,
yes,
as I recall, for
100% splitting out of a CE1. And it sounds like he's got the shimmery stuff, the shimmery stereo side, the chorus side, going to the Jubilee, because it sounds very, very tinsely.
But I presume for like the rhythm tones, like kind of all the Hendrixy stuff on Under the Bridge, it's got to be the clean channel.
Yeah, he just cranked them.
Mm-hmm. So he didn't use the overdriven channel.
I think he had. If you listen to those isolated tracks, you're pretty much hearing, you're hearing a Marshall that's kind of gritty but very clean. And he's stepping on a Boss distortion pedal for his.
Which one was he using back then?
A DS1 or DS2, probably interchangeably. Same with Kurt Cobain.
Mm. Yeah. Well, and speaking of Kurt Cobain, we see them there at 32. Smells Like Teen Spirit. Certainly, like really raw. Great. For somebody that gets ragged on as not being that good of a guitar player, I remember when I first started bringing Nirvana tunes to my guitar teacher, he just thought they were like not that good at guitar. But certainly it sounded
well, if you
great.
did like a musical examination of how his melodies rub against the chords, his tunesmithery goes, it hangs with anybody that ever wrote songs. I mean, if you want to be critical about it, but it's just that we were coming out of that culture of virtuosity. So, and his playing was, and that's, by the way, I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's going to be a trend we see now, where there's a trend away from virtuosity. So virtuosic guitar players, I remember they were panicking back then. It's the death of guitar. It's over for us. It's all synthesizers and grunge people. Even though guitar was hot, and I thought I was hearing more guitar. I was like, no, it just sounds like guitars now. It sounds like awesome. Oh, look.
And I see that Bohemian Rhapsody makes a reprisal.
Right? You got it, man.
Wayne's World.
Remember, movies and MTV. That was a video. So very important is the MTV component here. And on MTV, that video would be higher on this list. But the radio was second to MTV at this time.
Yeah. I'm trying to see what else we see.
Well, we've got the entrance of U2 with Mysterious Ways. That's a very important change. And it goes hand in hand with what I was describing with Depeche Mode, where bands from the 80s were looking for new ways to incorporate the rising trend of this kind of rawer sound. So the U2 we know today, the post, this is post Joshua Tree, right? It's less expansive. It's more low fidelity. Well, it's expansive, but it's low fidelity. It's gritty. It's gnarly. And Flood had a hand in that. And also with Depeche Mode, where they took the disco type music that they liked. And when I say disco, I mean in the European sense. They would call it, we would just call it like a dance club or something. And they took that English disco, and they wanted live drums, live guitar to sound like live drums and live guitar.
Yeah. But I also want to point out here, we have Toad the Wet Sprocket, and there was certainly like clean strat, reverby, delayed, clean tone on that, not just for the intro, but solo too.
And thank you for reminding me, because also Duran Duran around this time was doing that Toad the Wet Sprocket tone. But by the way,
and Amy Grant, I was saying Amy Grant had Dan Huff doing all those really kind of heavy lead in like dirty rhythm parts on
Okay,
Good
great.
For Me. I don't know if you remember that song. It had like a big synthesizer kind of intro. I don't know if you remember this song, but had a lot of these, overdriven guitar. I wouldn't say there wasn't a solo in there that was. It was like a little solo, but I would say that Toe of the Wet Sprocket was kind of more in the trajectory that things were
Yes.
moving. I think.
And by the way,
You had some good guitar tone too on I Can't Dance.
in Genesis, was there? I forget that. Is that right?
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's. I don't think there was a solo, but you had kind of like it was. I Can't Dance is pretty stripped, right? There's not. It has kind of like. I think it's off of like an A.
I can't dance. I can't walk. Only thing about me. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, you too. Achtung Baby, because they were doing so many overdubs, a lot of the times they got away from their, like the edge was in the control room. I heard a thing with Daniel Lanois where he was talking about this. They got away from the big amps in the studio rooms because they were doing so many small parts that would be spliced together, and a lot of the Achtung Baby guitar sounds were recorded through a Korg A3, an early multi-effects processor. And so when you listen to it, if you listen for that crummy sound of those little boxes that were digital distortions and stuff, it's kind of that, amazingly. And they would do things like for Mysterious Ways, that super lo-fi sound. They did like a sub mix and they ran it. They mic'd up the headphones. So like the headphones were sitting on a table with a stereo bus from a few guitars and a bass maybe going through it. And somebody heard it on playback just in the room through the headphones sitting there cranked up and stuck a microphone there and they used it.
Nice. Let's see. I'm surprised I forgot that Genesis kind of had a little resurgence separately of Phil Collins with like Hold on My Heart, and those are nice pop tunes.
I see two.
Let's see.
Yeah, two more important trends. The Cure, Friday I'm in Love. Now that hit song wouldn't make you think of this necessarily, but that record it was on was yet another band that had an 80s sound that now was pivoting toward the more rocky guitar sounds. And their guitar player who played the really distorted, well, they all did. That's a cool record. I don't care what anybody says. But the record that's on had a live concert movie that came out too. And the guitarist was a guy named Porl Thompson. And he's fantastic. He's an amazing player.
Any other ones on here that you feel like are worth mentioning?
Somehow we missed Def Leppard. That's another one that if we were looking at the MTV list, Def Leppard, Pour Some Sugar on Me would be all the way up there with it was that. And that would be up there at the same time. Actually, maybe that's a little earlier. That would be up there on the MTV charts with the first Appetite for Destruction hits.
Yeah, because that had like what it was. Photograph was Photograph was on the album before Hysteria, right?
I don't know their records very well, to be honest with you, but I do remember the timing of their hits. And Pour Some Sugar on Me was definitely happening.
But I think that was the second Mutt Lange record
could be right.
that they did. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Well, it's not, there's no guitar on it, but Bonnie Raitt, I Can't Make You Love Me. And I'm pretty sure that was, what's his name? What's the name of the piano player? Bruce Hornsby. I think he played the piano on that.
Wow.
I like his piano playing, but I feel like every time I hear him, I just have this impression that he's just like slamming the keys. Like his attack is really hard. It's like the Stevie Ray Vaughan attack, but on a piano.
So there's a producer, when we get into the next couple years, and again, this is all from memory, but I think if some listener fact checks me, I think I'll get it right. there is a producer we need to remember the name of, and that name is Terry Date, because he's going to become important.
Who's your pick then for 1992 guitar tones, moving in the direction, propelling the inertia of the early 90s into the mid 90s?
When it comes to guitar, for me, the transition of the 80s into the 90s in terms of a guitar-centric, not a radio hit-centric player, but Slash owns the day.
Yeah, I think November Rain has to be there, but I also think as an honorable mention is certainly Under the Bridge, Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I don't know that I would necessarily say that was a trend in how it was, although you could say that a lot of that Hendrix-y kind of like double stopping stuff became more popular, like Spin Doctors kind of were utilizing
along
that
with the
kind
slap
of
bass.
thing.
They were an attempt to capitalize on Chili Pepper's success.
Yeah, and you know, even kind of getting into, I forget what year Jagged Little Pill came out, but there was some of that too that was kind of Chili Peppers-y, where she had Dave Navarro and Flea.
Yeah, I think that's going to come somewhere around 94.
Yeah. Let's move to 93. I need to take a pee break.
Okay.
Hold on.
So while you're gone, I'm going to keep talking. Something we didn't mention, we didn't pick Nirvana as a central focus of 1991, even though that is when they broke through. Because while the trend toward more guitar-focused stuff is happening generally, so the world is ready for Nirvana, there's a delayed response back then. It's not like now where everything releases across all platforms and blows everyone's mind. There were only 40,000 copies of Nevermind printed by Geffen, and when Nirvana hit MTV with their cool video, all of a sudden they had to print more records. So it's a very big deal. Nirvana is probably the most important band of the early 90s in terms of guitar and what happens to guitar. But we didn't pick them. They actually weren't in the greater public consciousness yet. So while you were gone, I was just talking about how. Oh, okay.
I know. I heard the whole thing. Yeah. So I heard it all the way up to public consciousness. Yeah. So let's dig into 93.
Yeah. And now you're going to see the alt rock, grunge, whatever, new punk, whatever you want to call the early 90s guitar Seattle thing. You're going to see that start to arrive in the public consciousness.
We got Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. This is Bodyguard era. What's it with Kevin Costner oriented movies and hit soundtracks?
Well,
like
he's a gentle guy
Bodyguard.
that played in those dramas at the time. He was Hollywood's leading man.
Yeah.
And when movies had a romantic edge back then, that was an era where you needed a rock ballad. You know, that was the sound of love in this era.
Right. I'm definitely seeing way less guitar-oriented music, like just looking in the top 10 here.
Yep, the radio has pivoted toward a double down in pop, you know.
But we do see, as I mentioned, Spin Doctors, Two Princes kind of has that double stoppy, guitar tone, not Strat. I'm pretty sure they were using like humbucking guitars.
They all their stuff was basically holdover. It was like late 80s type stuff.
Right. Yeah, but definitely that was still a good song though, I would say.
Oh,
good solo.
Duran that I was talking about. They made their pivot to guitar music with
Ordinary World, yeah. Tony, shout out Raphael.
So what I'm seeing here is the radio, it seems, was offering the safer versions of kind of this alt rock thing. It's almost like it's buried, whereas on MTV, it was absolutely championed. Also, there would by this time be alternative radio stations and college radio, and that's where a lot of the stuff that changed, a lot of the stuff I think of as definitive of the era kind of lived until the big radio could get it. Like we had a station that we would tune into coming out of Detroit that played nothing but, that kind of rock stuff. And then, like I said, if I was in a supermarket, at this point they were turning toward the pop stuff and away from, and even some country, by the way, on the radio where I was. A lot of that country rock crossover stuff would have been on the radio at this time.
Right. We got Four Non-Blondes. You got a little
which is
guitar
already, when we hear that, we're already talking about the co-option of the huge trends that are happening on, on MTV and those other. So did you see Aerosmith is now pivoted to the Alicia Silverstone era?
Yeah, Crying, yeah. Yeah, I remember
Huge
that.
Shout out to I'll enter your hip hop world for a second or whatever. Positive K, I Got a Man, is one of my favorite pop hip hop things of ever. It has Lil' Kim, right? Is that Lil' Kim? No, who is that? The woman on that. She's got, darn it, I wish I could remember who she is. But she's the one that says, I got a man. And it's so good. What your man got to do with me? I got a man. I ain't trying to hear that, see? You remember that?
Yeah, I remember it. Cypress Hill. They were big because of L.A. Let's see, Madonna, John Cicada. Yeah, he there was definitely some processed guitar on some of those. Kenny G.
And there's a shift here too. Look at Ice Cube with "It Was a Good Day." Now that's from the
using the Isley Brothers. Isn't that right? He was an Isley. He was
they were
using an Isley
using more
Brothers
old
song.
school sounds, but also it's from the Predator, which that record also used like Flea on it and stuff. There's some crossover things. Sonic Youth did a track in 1990 with. 90 or could be 91, but they did a track with Chuck D. You're starting to see more and more kind of like the subcultures are combining to take on the big radio hegemony.
Yeah. Looking if anything I missed here. All right, we got Michael Bolton again. He was now. I wouldn't say that necessarily there's a ton of guitar work on it, but the 10 Sumner's Tales Sting. There was some I wouldn't say iconic guitar work, but really good guitar work on that album, and probably the best, arguably some of the best drum mixes of the 90s were on that album. I think they're mostly Vinnie Colaiuta. But like what's the first song on that? If I Ever Lose My Faith. That's got a great well, also mix.
His melodies were, he really challenged the norm. Sting did with the melodies that he would write and how they rubbed against the chords. A lot of really, really cool. He does a thing where he'll write a song and the harmony of the song is one thing. He'll sing a note that isn't really presented by the harmony it's against. And so the harmony changes because of where he's sticking his melody note. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, because you actually see If I Ever Lose My Faith at 96. But there's like cool stuff on that song because there's like this rotary thing going on with the guitar, like this rotary effect in arpeggio, and it's kicking on the left and right. There's some really cool, like subtle guitar things on there that I think are always really cool. And then Gin Blossoms had some cool guitar parts on a lot of their stuff too. I mean, it wasn't like virtuosic, but I thought that they had some some good songs, some good solid kind of moving into what mid 90s kind of pop rock, like Hootie and the Blowfish type stuff. They were kind of in
so I
that
see a couple
trend.
things. It's a good mention when it's good that you mention Gin Blossoms. I also see Green Jelly and Ugly Kid Joe, and these are bands that are deliberate attempts to make safer the rising alt rock thing. So you see like all those bands kind of pushed to the side, and they're bringing onto the charts, meaning onto the radio, because people, whatever the hits are pretty much whatever's being played by the big stations, because that's all we had. And you see Gin Blossoms, Green Jelly, Ugly Kid Joe, Spin Doctors, Four Non Blondes. I know that the wonderful producer who wrote that and sang it is amazing, but that song is intended to be a fluff piece pushed upon us. You're talking
about the Four Non Blondes.
But there's
I think she ended up writing a bunch of stuff for Pink, later on.
Absolutely, and by the way, she wrote she worked on a lot of great projects that go under the radar. She's extremely prolific as a writer and a producer. Very important.
Yeah, I see Tony again. Anniversary. If you're doing any like jam at in North Hollywood at the what's the name of the place where they always have this epic like R&B jam is the Federal Bar. You got to know how to play Anniversary. It's always going to be in there. It's got it's a really great guitar work. Pretty sure it was all Jubu Smith. That's a really cool guitar part. This is for R&B stuff, it's great.
This is very fun for me that we have this cultural difference, because even to this day, you would never, and I mean never, find in Northwest where I am. I'm stuck here in the Rust Belt. You go to a jam where there's musicians showing up to play. It's either blues or it might be classic rock, but almost all blues. It's not even classic rock. It'd be like Motown. People don't jam on Tony where I am. It doesn't. It just never would happen.
Yeah, like you have to know some Tony. You need to know some Brandy.
Yeah.
These are expectations in the canon.
That's amazing.
Of
that would
R&B
never
guitar
even
players.
be uttered. People would be like, that's not even instruments. Like, people wouldn't even think of that as a song to play.
And I noticed there's a second Gin Blossoms here, 95. Hey Jealousy had some kind of cool guitar stuff too.
I wouldn't say cool, but it certainly was on the radio.
So what's your pick for guitar sounds?
We are now at a point where I don't think that if we're talking guitar sounds of the era, there's nothing on this list that defines 1993. We are well into the era of a revolution of guitar tone that's being ignored on this list completely.
I'm just trying to see if I could say one that's kind of...
I'll tell you what, you do that. I'm going to do my pee break, and when I come back, I'm going to tell you what Tony's reality is of this era. I'll be back.
All right. I'm thinking we kind of got to go... I'm thinking you probably got to go Spin Doctors on this one, because it is more guitar-centric than most of the stuff that's on this list. I think that's the direction that you got to go. I think you got to go Spin Doctors, Two Princes. I think that very guitar centric, very guitar forward, has a prominent guitar solo. People were definitely taking it to their guitar teacher and saying, "Teach me, teach me Two Princes," and that was certainly getting some love. So that's my pick for 93, but we'll see what Tony thinks about 94. I'm trying to think if there's any other honorable mentions on here. Another big one, maybe it was the previous year, was definitely the guitar sound on Michael Bolton's When a Man Loves a Woman, when he did the Percy Sledge cover, and he had Michael Thompson playing the introduction. That was a pretty cool guitar part, but definitely slower, ballady, type stuff, but still a good guitar tone nonetheless. And I think he told me that he played that, Michael Thompson, that is, with Seymour Duncan stacked single coils, or like a stacked humbucker to make a noiseless single coil, in other words. And so that was what was, even though it still sounds pretty stratty, it was a Strat guitar, I suppose, but it was utilizing that because he didn't have enough money to afford separately a Les Paul and a Strat, because he was driving a taxi when he wasn't doing sessions in LA, and so he had to have a workhorse like that. Tony, what you missed is I said another one that was kind of leading up into this, although I think it might have been the previous era, that had a great guitar tone, was the Percy Sledge cover of When a Man Loves a Woman. And that was a very popular song, had a great guitar tone intro, and Michael Thompson played it. And he told me that he couldn't afford like a Les Paul and a Strat because he was like driving a taxi for like spare money when he wasn't getting sessions. And he used like a stacked single coil, like Seymour Duncan humbucker that was like a noise canceling single, but it was really a humbucker, and he used that to play that intro. But just a aside.
Nice. Okay, so
should we move to 1994?
No,
or do you want to give your pick here in
93? What I think is the more important trend of the era.
So you tell me what the more important trend is of the era. Yeah. We'll have that be your contribution to 93. Well,
obviously by now we have the bands that are huge. Lollapalooza is the biggest thing on earth. It's touring alt rock bands. Jane's Addiction has headlined Lollapalooza. We're rolling up on Lollapalooza 2 or something. We've got Alice in Chains is happening. Mother Love Bone has come and gone. Temple of the Dog has been huge. Cameron Crowe is either working on releasing or has released the movie Singles. These are all things related to the rock and roll, this alt rock, whatever you want to call it, trend. Stone Temple Pilots have hits. Soundgarden is happening. Metallica's doing a bunch of stuff.
I'm looking at right now, and I've shared it on the screen in parallel, looking at the MTV Video Awards for the same year, because Are You Gonna Go My Way is still on.
Okay,
here.
But I'm just telling you.
But it's not on. So I mean, I'm just saying this as a parallel, heart-shaped box.
Yeah, dude, heart-shaped box is in utero. Like we haven't even talked Nevermind. That's the most important record of the early 90s by anyone in terms of changing the culture. So okay. Let me give you 3 guitar-related trends that are happening in the early 90s that I think are important. So one, I mentioned Brendan O'Brien has started producing everything, and it's a return to a raw sound. A lot of Marshalls, a lot of the Black Crowes we mentioned, that kind of a vibe. The Guns N' Roses vibe was huge through the early 90s. Nirvana was the biggest, most important atom bomb to the center of pop culture that had happened. Now keep in mind, I say that with full knowledge that rap and hip hop had already been an insurgent musical culture happening for a long time that went through the same process, where what we heard on the radio was a very friendly version. But if you were going to see like what is the voice of the people of the time in terms of youth culture, you're looking at rap and hip hop in the early 80s and the hard rock bands giving way to these more raw punk related, getting away from those pristine sounds and getting raw. That was what people were going to concerts and seeing, and that was, by 93 we're like, Rage Against the Machine's first record is happening, Pearl Jam is happening, Soundgarden is happening.
Yeah, and Tool
is happening. Even. I'm seeing all these bands. I went to Lollapalooza in 93, and it was Primus, Alice in Chains, Tool, Who else? Arrested Development was a hip hop group on that tour. Not in 93.
Was Pearl Jam there?
I mean, they were around, but they weren't. They just didn't happen to be on the stage that day.
Now, when you went to that Ace of Base?
Yeah, I didn't
concert,
see it, but I
was
love
that?
Ace of Base. But okay, so in terms of guitar tone, very important are the two towers of Big Muff tone, because the Big Muff fuzz tone was ubiquitous for this kind of era and culture. And we're talking about Dinosaur Jr. We're talking about the Smashing Pumpkins.
Was that 93 though? That Smashing Pumpkins.
Smashing Pumpkins had a couple albums out. 93 would have been
But in terms of when they broke with what's the Butterfly.
Well, they broke long before that. They broke.
But that was when they were really
they were
huge,
big before
though.
that. They were big when they came out with Disarm is when they got big, which is off of Siamese Dream.
But they didn't chart until
I never
when? 94
measured
probably.
art by chart. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is what everybody listened to. Everybody that was into guitar.
Definitely some muff tones.
And the fun trick, the Dinosaur Jr. thing, is that he would have the Big Muff on with a pedal after the Big Muff that was like another overdrive, usually like a tube preamp or something, but with the volume turned down low to clean things up. So his clean tone was the Big Muff through the Marshall turned about halfway up, and then it would be also going through the second pedal that is set to a quieter place. Then he would turn off the quieter pedal to let the Big Muff through for the solo. So he did kind of a reverse gain stacking, which then later I think Paul Gilbert did that too.
So I'm going to move on to 94.
Well, there's one more important trend, which is the Terry Date thing.
Please.
So Terry Date, the producer during the early 90s, brought some of the harder tones, and what people don't talk about anymore is it was significant that he focused on solid state guitar sounds at that time. So when you hear Pantera, that's Terry Date from this era. When you hear some of Kim Thale from Soundgarden would use solid state things for distortion. I think he also worked with bands that didn't use solid state, but it was that same kind of scooped. It was like Slayer, stuff like that. So Terry Date was an important person bringing those sounds of, you have to understand when those bands like Soundgarden, Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, by the time they were getting played on the radio, the wave was over. It had passed. But the trend would show up in the bands that got played on the radio. But it wasn't like, dude, you ask anybody who's like a music historian what the most important moment was of the early 90s for pop culture and music, and they're going to talk about Nirvana. They're going to talk about that. They're going to talk about the grunge and alt-rock movements of the early 90s. That's the definitive thing. And then separately, trends in music that was marketed as black music, pop music in that realm. Those are the twin movements. It has nothing to do with, the stuff that is at the top of the charts that they were playing in the office.
So let's look with that in mind at 94, and I'm looking now. Can you see the MTV ones as well that I'm sharing with you? Yeah. So number 1, Green Day.
Yeah.
Basket Case. Certainly some cool guitar work. I mean, on there, like not super technical, but just raw and distorted.
Yeah.
And great.
And of course, they had already That's a good example because they were super significant because of what was going on Gilman, right, in Berkeley. long before the rest of the world heard about them.
Just a couple of boys from Crockett, California. You got Boys to Men, not a lot of guitar there. Gin and Juice, not a lot of guitar there. Soundgarden,
so
Black
this
Hole
is latter day Soundgarden. Like by now they were kind of like, oh, they're doing pop music now. Like when we heard Soundgarden, we were listening to Louder Than Love. Outshined was their breakthrough record in 91 or 2. They had broken through big time. Look, Nirvana, now we're noticing Nirvana when they're on Unplugged, when they're already at the last year of his life.
Right. See, Coolio, not much here. Here's Disarm, 94.
Yeah. But Siamese Dream, I
Pumpkins.
think, was out in 93. So they started playing it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good, huh? I remember stuff,
Aerosmith.
right?
You are. I mean, at 93, I was 8.
Yeah. Now, two important things I see here, and then I know you were going to say something. Stone Temple Pilots. They were another one of those bands that kind of rode in on the coattails of the movement I'm describing, but very important guitar sounds for the middle to the end of the 90s. They were more influential in terms of just staying power and what would reach the masses with, and again, seriously guitar-centered music for the rock guitar world. They were very important.
I remember learning some Stone Temple Pilot stuff as a
and that was all about
player.
Distortion layered with clean, so that he could play complex chords that you could hear every note, like almost jazz chords, but also have a wall of distortion. So it was about layering clean and distortion. Also, you see Tom Petty. This is a return.
Last Days of Marriage.
That was that record, Wildflower, I think. Wildflowers? No, Last Chance with Marriage. Anyway, it was before Wildflowers, but this was starting to return to some of those
more organic guitar tones for sure.
Riding on the coattails of the vibe of the Black Crowes. Sheryl Crow would show up doing the same thing around this time. Beastie Boys, bridging the gap.
Yeah, Candlebox.
Yeah.
Candlebox.
Yeah. Beastie Boys were bridging the distance between what was commercial hip hop and rap and a lot of rock guitar sounds, live instruments.
Yep. You had more Green Day, Counting Crows.
A lot of actually great guitar on the Counting Crows records.
Yeah. Now we know Lisa Loeb, your acoustic singer-songwriter.
REM releases Monster, which is an all fuzzed out guitar record, riding again on this trend of the big fuzzy guitars.
Beck.
So they're further on down the list, but man, these bands are, I'm telling you, and in movies like The Crow were coming out at this time, which had a lot of this kind of music.
Right.
They're pushing all of these bands that are they're even kind of sneaking in now. Like some of these bands are bands that have been around for 7 or 8 years on the road, and a bunch of little jerks like me were going to their shows, but then now they're on TV or on the radio finally. But we're all kind of done with it, man. It's like.
Yeah, and you got Stone Temple Pilots, Vaseline. Sheryl Crow comes in. Let's see. Although I don't think the best guitar work was on All I Want to Do. I mean, that was the most popular one. But
Peter Stroud on tour with her was amazing.
Yeah, he's great. Let's see. Interstate Love Song, of course.
Cranberries. So you're starting to see a sneak in, and we're seeing that divergence between the hip hop and music marketed as black music. I say it that way because everybody listens to it. But prior to this, that wasn't necessarily the case.
I remember a lot of Tony Braxton from that era because my grandparents lived in Australia. And when you used to take a flight from LA to Australia, which we do like for the holidays and stuff like that, it wasn't like now where you had like a personal, like screen. It was like a radio on repeat that had like the same like top 20 songs that were like on the radio. And I remember that Tony Braxton, at whatever the month was that this was in 1994, had so many hits at that time that like every third song in the loop of just the 20 songs would play over and over and over again. And the headphones at the time kind of looked like stethoscopes. I just remember hearing "You Mean the World to Me" like every, however long it took for the loop to go around, like an hour or 2 hours or whatever. But anyway, funny aside, based on Tony Braxton, we heard a lot of that record. Yeah. And a lot of these songs, like I'd say the more poppy ones, there was of course no Alice in Chains. There was a lot of Ace of Base too. Let's see. What else we got? Babyface. Madonna.
I saw who's it? Sorry. Tom Petty, You Don't Know How It Feels. That's definitely from Wildflower.
Yeah. A lot of All for One. All the David Foster era stuff's creeping in. I mean, certainly he was around before then. Oh, Counting Crows.
That's from their second
around
record.
Here.
So and that one has more guitar on it. That was produced by somebody, what is
TLC.
his name? Gil Norton, is it? He used to work with the Pixies. They brought in the Pixies producer.
More Tony Braxton, Breathe Again. Rolling Stones. John Mellencamp. Weezer. There they are.
Weezer shows up. That's kind of, now we're crossing over into the, okay, so guitar stuff is hits now. You know what I mean? Like now that it's like they're safe. They're a safe band to do on the radio, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. See what else we got. More Cranberries, more Soundgarden.
I love the Cranberries, by the way. They were fantastic.
Let's see. Aerosmith. Let's see. I'm curious how this lines up with the Billboard's hits, because this is like completely Bryan Adams, which I don't think was on any of those. John Cicada, Prince, Elton John. There were no videos for that. There was John Mellencamp. Wild Night was way more, was way further up on the Billboard's charts than it was on the video charts. Michael Bolton wasn't even on there. You Said You Loved Me, But I Lied. Or I Said I Loved You, But I Lied. Let's see what else we got. 10,000 Maniacs.
That's good stuff.
We're gonna. I know Natalie Merchant goes on to have some killer guitar tones on her records following. I think it's the next year, 95. Melissa Etheridge had some good guitar tones on there. Yeah, on Come to My Window, that whole album. Let's see. Yeah, we already mentioned Last Dance with Mary Jane. This is when Seal 2 starts to come into play. I'm surprised we didn't see like Kiss from a Rose. Was that 95 when we saw that? Because that owned the charts for a long time.
That's one of those
Prayer
wedding
for the Dying.
songs.
Wedding songs,
like
really? Kiss from a Rose, huh?
Kind of thing.
Yeah, Bonnie Raitt, Love Sneaking Up on You. I remember that. So what do you think? Who are you giving the championship crown here to for guitar tones? I think I got mine.
For me in '94, and at this point I'm just in a place where I'm picking stuff I like, or I shouldn't say that I like, but that I liked back then. And everybody, forgive me, I just can't bring myself to care about such schlock as Bryan Adams, etc. It's kind of like, oh man, you're like, hey, who really rocks is that Barry Manilow. It's like, no, dude, it doesn't. It doesn't rock. It's not interesting. But anyway.
Well, there goes our State Farm sponsorship.
But I love that I'm always on your podcast being a curmudgeon. I gotta go Stone Temple Pilots because they were important for the rest of the '90s in guitar culture.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, but I'd say a close second is I really like all the guitars on Dookie.
Yeah, I mean they were, that was important too. I think it wasn't as far-reaching in its influence, but I think that it was in kind of a sub-market. They were kings.
But they've also had the probably of all the bands that we're looking at on this list, they're one of the few that are still relevant now. Like they've been at their zeitgeist for multiple decades. Which is hard to do. So let's move on to our last year of our conversation, and maybe we'll pick this up in a couple weeks and do 96 through 2000. But we're gonna go to 95. I'm gonna go 95 on billboards. I'm gonna go 95 on MTV. So that way we kind of get a little bit more of a representative look. I know we didn't do this for the first couple years of the 90s, but I think we'll know that we had a comprehensive look. Let's start this time with the billboards, and then we'll go over to MTV. So we're seeing right off the bat, number one, Coolio's Gangster's Paradise. He had Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds. That was definitely, as you've mentioned, the parallel with the film having a hit song. TLC Waterfalls 2, Creep, TLC 3, and then you have Seal, Kiss from a Rose, also supported by the Batman film. But still a great song. On Bended Knee, Boyz II Men, Real McCoy, Another Night, Mariah Carey, Fantasy, which is a great song too. I really like that song. There is, well, on the sampling, there was a lot more guitar than on her version of Fantasy, but Fantasy's still a great song. And then of course there's the ODB remix. I remember this playing a lot at dances. In 95 I would have been 10. I guess there probably wasn't so many dances when I was 10, but by the time I got into middle school there was definitely this song.
I can't, it's hard for me, Mason, because I can't relate to this as like a what's important about it. The whole time I've been struggling with this whole like go to Billboard and see what hit.
How about we'll go to MTV. We'll head home.
It's not MTV either, man. It's like if we were going to talk about what are significant guitar trends or sounds of an era, that's different from what are important money making trends in the music industry.
But I think if it has enough pervasiveness, it's going to end up here in one form.
Yeah, I guess you're.
Maybe not in the same year that it peaked for you, but we know that the record industry is always a few years. Like
you're making the Reagan Thatcher assumption that the cream rises to the collective top.
I think that for stuff that has staying power, maybe it wasn't what had informed the original sound or the inventor of the original sound, but for how it ends up having longevity, however that's manifested in the formation of a band, we're going to see that in some version here. And we have you as our catch-all, our fail-safe for anything that fell through the cracks.
Well, okay.
So what about Dionne
I've never
Farris?
Heard of her.
She had some. There was some.
No, I promise I've never even heard that name. Nope.
You have. I'm going to text you this right now. I don't feel like I can represent her, but there's like slide, like distorted slide guitar on it. I wouldn't say it's not like a piece that you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's like the best thing I've ever heard, but I'm trying to remember what, this wasn't the song that was on the chart, but, you got your.
Oh, are you texting me? Oh, okay, yeah, I got it.
I'm going to text it to you. You ready?
Oh wait, what's this?
Ready for some you're gonna know this song as soon as you open it up.
Okay, we'll see.
I know song.
Oh man, it just started pouring rain here. I'm listening to it. No, I've never heard that before.
I can't believe
I told you we lived in different worlds.
I kind of. Well, I remember. Well, I used to hear it on the radio a lot, and then I'd forgotten about it for a long time, and then I was watching this Spike Lee series. I forget. She's Got to Have It, where he remade it into a series. And there is such good music. It's like the music in it is so well cataloged, and he even like stops the show at certain points and shows the album cover of what was just like scored. It's really cool the way he did it. It's really creative. If you have Netflix, check out She's Gotta Have It. It's a remake of the movie that he did, She's Gotta Have It, but it's like extended over.
So is this something? Is that
10 episodes a season?
Were you were aware of this? Were you listening to that in your free time, or is it just that it was popping up in?
It was just on the radio all the time when I was a kid, and then I hadn't thought about the song for a long time. But he's kind of bringing in, everything from Miles Davis, John Coltrane, like jazz to, like all sorts of stuff. I think he had some Brandy in there. He had some Maxwell. It was very diverse. Jill Scott. It was very diverse in terms of its generation and the musicians, but it was really, really well done. Let's see what else it got. You got some Brian Adams rears again. Have You Ever Loved a Woman? Remember, it was part of that Johnny Depp movie, Don Juan.
I guess so. I think I remember something about that.
Hootie and the Blowfish. Get some guitars.
Well, it's an important.
I
mean, that's a really important thing. And then, of course, he's important in the world of country music too. He's almost important. He's double important. He's a trend one place and a trend in another. And people, it's easy to forget. But this really is a time when it was more accepting to the business executives to put on the air a black man singing what would have previously been relegated to white people music. And I'm not talking about...
he killed it.
When I talk about that stuff, I'm not talking about the actual artist's work. I'm talking about the way that the business would categorize, package, and market. They would put things in a box and sell them to people who would have access to that particular box. And Hootie and the Blowfish, it was rare. If you think about a black singer who had big hits, it's usually marketed as, this is an R&B song, this is a hip-hop song, this is a whatever song, and it's on those radio stations, and it's in that world. Hootie and the Blowfish really didn't seem to have that. It seemed like that was a breakthrough for the industry.
I don't know a lot about their story. I mean, I remember that they were like a college kind of band from South Carolina. I think they're from Charleston. And I remember that the video also, I don't know if it was like featured in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, but I know that the video had
really?
Jim Carrey in
I
it.
don't remember that.
Yeah.
How interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. But I just remember like the first song I think I ever heard, what was the first one of their, the first song that I ever heard of them? It wasn't the All You Want to Be With You. It was one of the other ones, but man, it's like his voice is so like powerful, and it comes in, and I think that there's some decent guitar in there too.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
sure.
it sounded like a they sounded like a band, not like a drum machine and some really sheen like overdubs.
So tell me about Sophie V. Hawkins.
Put your
Number
cursor on
39.
her just so I can refresh my memory.
You don't remember the song As I
No.
Lay Me? Wow. We really were listening to different things.
I mean, I didn't know, dude. I wouldn't have. If I found out somebody was listening to Ryan Adams on purpose at that time of my life, I wouldn't have wanted to talk to them for another second. It would have been full-on judgment.
All right, well, then, what about Melissa Etheridge? I'm the Only One. It's off that same album that we talked about, I think, a little earlier on, but also great. I think John Shanks was involved with some of these. I don't know if it was this one, but whoever's playing guitars.
Yeah, and she's really terrific. And do you know Pete Thorne? He played with her, right?
Yeah.
He played on tour with her. Yeah,
much later though, and I think
for
it was in a touring
but
capacity.
he's, he's a heavy hitter.
I'm trying to look at who played guitar on that Melissa Etheridge album. I'm trying to look it up here. Let's see. So Waddy Wachtel.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And Pino Palladino played the bass.
Those two were thick as thieves at times, right? Weren't they?
I don't know. I didn't know that Waddy Wachtel and
maybe
Pino
I'm making
were a
that
thing.
up.
Well, because Pino is in Europe.
No, I'm confused. I have it. But
British. But Waddy Wachtel was playing. He did a lot of sessions. Like he played on some of the Steve Perry album. I think he was also doing stuff with like
he
Booker
played with
T.
Keith Richards, man.
He also played a lot with Lee Sklar in a lot of stuff, and he played with Stevie Nicks.
By the
too.
way, when you said Steve Perry, it came back to me. The producer I was referring to that sang the Four Non Blondes song, her name is Linda Perry.
Yeah.
I had forgotten that. But she's a really important songwriter of the era and producer that a lot of the hits we're talking about, well, a lot of hits of the day were her projects.
She's great. We got Sheryl Crow, All I Want to Do. We talked about that a little bit. I think that came out a little earlier than this. We talked about Madonna. There's not really much.
Very
much guitar
important,
work on there.
D'Angelo.
Yeah, where is he?
He's
though?
number
Is he on it?
86. Brown Sugar.
Okay, you're further down. Not a lot of guitar though.
No, but it's definitely still a part of that. What do you want to call it? That shift toward.
Well, it became neo soul.
The point is that it's live, raw instruments. It's not a bunch of patchwork. Mm-hmm. It's people performing, and that does matter to guitar players.
No, I think that was one of the first. Well, the first CD I ever bought was Boyz II Men 2. But I think the second CD that I ever bought was D'Angelo.
Oh,
Brown
hey, here's a question to test. I want to know if this was something you heard. So one of the R&B things that I did definitely hear, I see pop up at number 89, Bone Thugs and Harmony. Was that something that you were aware of?
Now, I was aware of it, and I remember, this is kind of funny. I remember that I liked them, and I remember I was like listening, like I remember my guitar teacher at the time, like I had like a Walkman, and First of the Month, is the one that goes like wake up, wake up, wake up, like it says like over and over again in the beginning. And they're from
That's
Ohio,
why I was
think,
curious, because they're on my radar because they were from Cleveland.
Yeah.
And so they did get a lot of play around here, and I wondered if that was
right. No, they got a lot, but I remember I had like a Walkman, like a black Walkman, and headphones, and I remember a guitar teacher's like, "Oh, what are you listening to?" I was like, "Oh, I'm listening to Bone Thugs and Harmony." He like listens to the song, and he's like, "Well, they're not harmonized, so why aren't they just Bone Thugs in unison?"
Wait, they're not harmonized.
Yeah, well, I guess that they weren't singing like a harmony. They were all singing the same note.
I thought they were famous for their harmonies.
I thought they were famous for their raps.
I guess we'll have to ask someone who paid more attention than I did.
I remember my parents would like make fun of me because there was the other one that was more popular when I was in middle school, but they just kept on saying bone like over and over again with like different like kind of like syncopation. My dad's like, "What are you listening to?" But yeah, I did like Bone Thugs and Harmony. I wonder where they are now.
If I had to guess, I'd say Cleveland.
Well, that's just a hop, skip, and a jump.
About 3 hours from here. No, it isn't.
Van Halen, like Can't Stop Loving You.
Yep. So this is we're about to lose Van Halen to the Sammy era, right?
Yeah. Oh, and Pretenders, they had some good stuff, but by that time it wasn't really guitar. Now, Cotton Eye Joe, you didn't throw that one in there. That's one we could do without.
That was like Gangnam Style of 1995.
There'll always be a place for it at a wedding or a karaoke bar. Let's pivot though from this and go over to the MTV chart and see where we diverge. Coolio is still up there. Waterfalls, TLC is still up there. Green Day is still hanging out for When I Come Around, but that's still off of Dookie. Hootie and the Blowfish, I Only Want to Be With You. That's the one that had
Alanis
Jim
Morissette
Carrey.
is rocking hard on MTV.
Oh man, yeah, Alanis Morissette, and that's kind of that carryover from a lot of that Chili Pepper stuff. You Ought to Know had Dave Navarro on guitar and Flea on bass.
That's Mutt Lange, right?
I don't think.
Oh, it wasn't.
That was Mutt Lange for Jagged Little Pill. No, it's not Mutt Lange. I forget the guy's name though. Hold on. The producer was Glenn Ballard.
Okay.
Yeah. We talked a little about Mariah Carey already. We talked about Weezer in '94. Blues Traveler, Run Around. Not really any guitar.
There's guitar. Yeah, man. Have I ever told you my thought about Blues Traveler and Spin Doctors? There is a whole genre of music that includes those two, among others. But it's music that only is really great for a montage. So if you have like a montage scene or like you're cleaning your house, if you put on the Run Around by Blues Traveler, you can work double quick, and it just is an automatic movie montage segment that just comes out of nowhere.
Well, it was part of a movie as well. I think it was called The Truth About Cats and Dogs, and this was part of that.
Okay, well that
soundtrack.
would work. I hope it was a montage.
Yeah. Hootie and the Blowfish, we've covered well. Red Hot Chili Peppers. Is this when Airplane came out?
Same
was
record.
that 95 or is that later?
And again, that
Same
was
record.
like at a time when they were, it was like not.
What was the record called though? That
One
was the
Hot
Dave
Minute.
Navarro one.
And for like Chili
Oh,
Peppers
yeah.
fans that were fans, we were suspicious when John Frusciante joined the band. Like, oh man, now it's kind of a little bit poppy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they were already kind of on their road to demise, even though I love that record. And so by this point,
but the Smashing Pumpkins though here, that's when I really got into
Yeah,
them.
and they were
Butterfly Wings. Because they were on
and that was
MTV
like,
all the time.
Again, like we were kind of moving on from that at that time. It's funny how that works. It's like generational.
Hand in My Pocket. I remember that music video more prominently than I remember the one for You Ought to Know. But there was some controversy with You Ought to Know because of some of the lyrics. And so I think that there was times when it got curtailed in terms of its
This was the era
playability.
of Tipper Gore, If
Right.
people don't know what I'm talking about, Tipper Gore is probably, I think, Al Gore's wife.
No, I don't think
Okay,
anymore.
well,
I think that
Tipper was on a campaign with what's called the PMRC, which was basically, I forget what it stands for, but it's parents trying to edit your music and censor everything, and it's ridiculous. And
Right.
and then that wound up resulting in the parental advisory
The parental
explicit
advisories.
lyrics
Yeah.
label that you see on many records.
Yeah. You have U2 make a reprisal with Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, which I think was also part of the Batman soundtrack for that era Batman, which was the Val Kilmer era.
Wow, yeah, that sounds about right.
Sheryl Crow, Strong Enough. You want some 12-string acoustic
I do
guitar
like
tone?
that song.
Yeah, it's a good song. December, Collective Soul. I remember that was a big one. Arpeggios with
Sure.
some chorus on it.
Warped.
Warped. Shaggy, your favorite.
I'm not mad at it.
You remember the Presidents of the United
I
States
sure
of
do.
America?
Yeah,
lump?
their whole thing, man. They had like
Oh,
limited
boy.
strings. Did you know that? So
No.
they took off the outer strings on the instruments. So the bass had the 2 center strings, and the guitar had like 4 strings or something.
Dave Matthews Band coming in here, kind of revitalizing some of the acoustic guitar.
Here come the Birkin.
folks. He definitely had like an interesting approach though with the acoustic guitar comparatively to like other kind of singer-songwriter guys up
He's
until
very
his
talented.
generation.
It's not my thing, but he's extraordinarily good.
What about
Yeah,
Bush?
another one of those kind of riding the coattails of the real movement bands, but they were good, and they were. This is just barely predating the No Doubt era.
Yeah. Still Dave Matthews Band's charting again
They were
with
huge.
Ants
Oh look,
Marching.
we skipped completely over Nine Inch
Nine
Nails.
Inch
Their
Nail.
entire career was like, this was actually kind of the peak, I think, of their public.
I think we made another pretty good resurgence in the late 90s.
Well,
They had
a resurgence
I forget
implies
the name of
that-
the record, but it was...
Okay, but a resurgence implies it's not their peak.
Well,
I mean, by definition, I think.
They still, I think in my mind, they still did
Well,
pretty
again,
good.
you're talking about did they make money and sell? Yeah, but I'm saying as a band, it's not their peak. As money makers,
Let's see.
they were, lots of stuff happening.
Yeah, Bush is here a couple of times.
Yeah,
Foo Fighters.
Foo Fighters was coming on the scene.
Yeah, Nirvana Unplugged was still charting in 95.
Post-mortem.
Yeah. Offspring.
Hey, here's one that you were asking about, Natalie Merchant.
Yeah, man, Natalie Merchant, Carnival and Wonder had really good guitar stuff on it, but I think Carnival was the better
Did you ever
guitar part if I had
figure
to pick
out
one.
the name of the woman who played guitar on that? Because her
Yeah, I looked her up. Her name is
Okay.
Jennifer Turner, and I didn't really see any other stuff that she did commercially that was anywhere in this
No, I remember
realm.
her.
But dang, I watched some live stuff of her playing it, and it's
she's great.
really good. I mean, like it. Yeah, she was playing that PRS like Custom 22 or Custom 24, and through a Marshall, and you could see, I couldn't really tell what was on it, but she had a big pedal board of stuff. Yeah, I think there was a Univibe on there for sure, because on some of it sounded like she had
Great,
a Univibe
man.
on
She's
there.
really good.
She was killing it.
And
Yeah,
I remember
was.
she's like like this vegetarian person, like a vegan or something. Because I remember an interview I read where she was like, she was trying to describe her perfect tone, and she's like, I like a big fat tone where I plug that PRS in a Marshall. It's nice and big and thick, just like a big juicy veggie burger. It's like, I was like, I don't think of corpulent tone with veggie burger, but okay.
Yeah, well, she's a great guitar player, vegan or not.
All right, I'm going to say something. I'm going to touch a hot third rail. I see Hole appears
all right, go
here.
for it.
Hole,
Okay.
Courtney Love's band.
Yep.
That first record of hers, what is it? Live Through This or something? That is a fantastic record. And I think a lot of it, I can't prove this, I think it was co-written by Kurt, and the record is absolutely fantastic. It's the songs are just absolutely awesome. And then when I saw her live, it was just such a wreck, just horrible. Her band was amazing, but she was mourning the loss of her husband and was not in a good way, where I really wanted someone to come and get her and take her off stage and take care of her, because she was suffering. She was clearly under heavy influence and not doing well and not behaving in a way that seemed healthy. And I'll just leave it at that, because I hate that people just feel like they can be disrespectful to celebrities who are also humans that are suffering. But what she did on stage was something that I really wish thousands of people didn't see.
Yeah. So with that said, 95, wrapping up the end, or wrapping up at the mid 90s, who's got your pick here for best guitar tone, most influential guitar tone, or maybe indicative or representative of the time? Going between MTV, going between the charts. You also forgot the Rembrandts, by the way.
I actually, I didn't.
and White Zombie, I was singing Rob Zombie.
And that
was
fits
a pretty
in with the
popular
Terry
song.
Date thing. That's that guitar trend, is that sound. When I talk about the latter half of the 90s for rock guitar, I would say that the most important stuff is probably going to be that Stone Temple Pilots stuff in that last half of the 90s. But there is a change in the trend, too, that I would think of as like the No Doubt phenomenon, where we're going
Right, but we're not there quite
we're
yet.
We're there,
so
but not on the charts.
Right, but the world ends in 1995. Where are we in 1995? Who is moving the inertia
You're talking about who's
into
getting
96?
Who of the people getting a lot of radio play are important?
Or MTV Music Video play?
Same thing. They're getting exposure on giant media. Last half of the 90s. I'm sorry.
Well, specifically in '95, and then we can do an over.
But
and
it
then we
just
can do
shows
an
how
overarching.
differently we think, because I'm thinking of '95. Who is influential on the last half of the '90s? But that's not what you're asking me. I mean, who has a cool tone in 1995 on the radio? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Then
kind
I
of.
would say,
who's kind of creating the trend that's going to move into the
well, see, that's what I was
to
going
late
to
'90s.
talk about. But I was going to say that's no doubt in '95.
Well.
But you're saying it has to be on the radio. So,
well, I'm saying they weren't prominent yet. We can sort of sidebar that and say that was existing in parallel.
Well, I think for guitar-heavy bands, in the year of 1995, Alanis Morissette's records were very, very important.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. I think, well, she had a lot of people playing on those records. You had Michael Landau on that record. You had Dave DeMauro on that record. You had Basil Fung on that record, who played the really chorusy stuff on what's the song? Ironic. Great song. I heard that song so many times. I would say that it's probably got to be her. But I would also say, I think that this is again sort of seeding a later time, but I think that like the Nine Inch Nails, the Bush, the Tool, there were certain things that they were doing too that I think were seeding the next generation of late '90s, early 2000s, like really hard rock. Like I think that they kind of paved the way for the Papa Roaches and the Limp Bizkits and even Korn. I think you could say.
Well, I would say that there's two.
Because you were getting more aggressive rock like that was really high gain.
Well, okay. What I hear is, first of all, Nine Inch Nails and Tool, those bands did their influential work in 1992, 1991, 1993. When we get into 1995, you're right. Their influence has taken hold. But what's happening too is there's a convergence of. Remember, I was talking about the overall trend of kind of hip hop culture and rock culture in the public space. These things are becoming more of a soup where they used to be more divided from each other. And that's where you end up with bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit, where there's a lot of loopy sounds, but also a lot of guitar sounds, kind of a mix of shouty, rappy. Beck
right.
would be, in 1996, you could say Beck was more important. But even in 1995, he's like, Beck's Odelay was probably the most important record of the next year.
Yeah. And we haven't even gotten to Marilyn Manson yet.
He was happening, just not on the radio.
Right, but he got there. Or at least in music video land, because he was so visibly different.
We had his record in '94 and saw him live because I remember he was touring with Nine Inch Nails. So we were aware of Marilyn Manson in '94 and the record was just coming out. The one.
So if we had to wrap up on 1990 to 95, who would you say are the three most influential players guitar-wise that kind of made the mark?
Slash, Kurt Cobain. And I think because of the hits from the early 90s, I think I got to give it to Landau, or one of the top session people.
Yeah, I think that the session guys certainly played a factor in there. I think Slash is unquestionably on the early to mid 90s Mount Rushmore. I do think that there could be an argument still made for. I think that there could be an argument made for Frusciante. I think there could also be an argument made for like Dave Navarro too, a little bit, because he was involved in Chili Peppers. He was involved in Alanis Morissette.
And that all comes from the Jane's Addiction LA thing.
Right, and Jane's Addiction was still in the early 90s. So I mean, I think that there's a lot of players in here. I mean, I think in some ways also Billy Joe Armstrong, like that Green Day sound was like this really big, great distorted guitar tone. I think those are honorable mentions that should just be in that conversation.
I think Dave Navarro is really important for the conversation of the transition from the LA Strip to the early 90s. He bridged that gap. By 95, I don't really hear him as being an influential player, but...
Well, maybe culturally, yes, because, you know, him and Carmen Electra, but musically, no. But I think that's a good place for us to stop, Tony. We did a lot of time today. I think that if anybody was wondering about 90s guitar, we definitely gave them a perspective. I don't know if it was the right one.
Didn't, you know, upset people with my harsh takes.
Well, you can't really you can't really dispute an opinion at the end of the day, and neither of us purport to be musicologists, so there's probably somebody more reliable. But I think from a guitar player lens, I think this is pretty good synthesis of looking at charts, looking at what was actually in the mainstream popular culture. I know that was somewhat problematic for you, Tony, maybe not in practice, but in name. And I think that you entertained it nonetheless, which I appreciate. And we'll take up. I almost feel like this was like too many years to consume. Maybe we need to like digest this in like 2 or 3 year increments.
Maybe even I would even go a different way and say just chunks of time, like first half of 90s, second half of 90s kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that it may be the way to do it. But thank you again for your time, and we will resume in the coming weeks.
I'm happy to do it, and you know,
all right.
I don't know what to say. I feel like I was a hostile witness today.
No, I don't think you were. And if anything, if you're a hostile witness, then I was maybe litigating my points too
you
aggressively.
Brought charts, that's all.
All right, see you, Tony. So that was a really long-winded retrospective of the early to mid 90s of music, and I look forward to actually taking this further and doing it in some different generations. And although I think anything really before the 90s, I don't know that I feel 100% confident on being any sort of spokesperson on. And that's not to say that I'm a spokesperson even from 1990 to 95, but I was alive during that time and was interested in guitar and guitar music. So Tony and I may diverge in places that were different for our two separate experiences and our age difference, which is about 8 years or so. Or maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's 10 years. But whatever it is, we certainly have a different perspective based on the timing that we grew up. But I think that that's the same with any of us listening to this. You might have a completely different read on that era in time based on how old you were. In 1990, I was 5 years old, and by 1995, I would have been 10. So just to give you a sense of my musical taste and prowess to analyze. So most of this analysis is kind of done way after the fact and kind of assuming the mind of a 5 or 10-year-old. But in any case, a really fun discussion. I look forward to the next one where we tackle some other years. I also want to thank everybody that makes this podcast possible. Hunter Harrison for editing and mixing the podcast, Mason Mejia for co-producing, and Tim Marco for creating all of the music. Until next time, I'm Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor from Vertex Effects. See you later.